We lost your presentation, Cassandra. I don't know if you're aware. Back. All right, 102 as promised. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today at our 7th book club. I'm so excited. We will be featuring Marsha Lederman. So very excited to have Marsha here today. I will introduce her in a couple of slides. So Cassandra, if you want to go to the next slide. So who am I? My name is Julie Mignot. I'm head of enterprise sales here at CDW. I take care of all sales and operations for the Quebec province. So how does that make me qualified to run a book club? It doesn't. I'm absolutely not qualified to do this. I'll be honest with you. I am extremely selfish in doing this. I have lots of fun, and I'm super excited to be your host today. Listen, I'm going to make some mistakes. Let's be honest. I'm going to say the wrong things probably. It's all coming from a great place, but I promise to be humble, and I'll learn, do better, and I hope that you will learn and do better with me. So if we move to the next slide, who is CDW? So I know some of you have been through all 7 book clubs with us, so I'm super happy that you follow this great event. But for those of you that are new with us, who is CDW? We are an IT reseller, a global IT reseller. So we started in 1984, and here we are today, 2022, with $20 billion in sales. And so we do product, professional service, managed services globally. And so a lot of our customers use us for all 3, or one of the 3, or 2 of the 3. We've done many acquisitions in the past. So for customers that need help integrating their own acquisitions, we certainly are a partner for you. I'm going to keep this one short because I always get the comment, Julie, you do too long in the slides in the beginning. But I encourage you to give me a call and or an email and say, hey, I want to learn more about what CDW does. But today is an event about learning with our wonderful sponsors. So Cassandra, on the next slide, I want to introduce Lenovo. So for those of you that might know, this event is sponsored by Lenovo. But why Lenovo with CDW? So Lenovo is one of our, we are Lenovo's #1 reseller by revenue and sales. And so we are their largest reseller in Canada. And I'm really proud to be co-sponsoring with them today. We have dedicated Lenovo people that work at CDW globally. They specialize in mobile laptops, desktops, workstation, among all other solutions that we sell through the data center as well. And we can do services around the modern IT. So they have an exceptional 360 hardware lifecycle service offering, and Lenovo is Microsoft's #1 autopilot partner in Canada. They deliver security services, so a full suite of integrated and security services and software. So I'm really excited to introduce, can everybody go on mute other than Rowan and Marsha, of course. So Rohan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why Lenovo is here today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie, for the quick intro there. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Again, my name is Rowan Kress, and I'm so excited to be here representing Lenovo. We are a sponsor again for this amazing event. Couldn't stay away. If you just want to go to the next slide, Cassandra. Lenovo is a leader in the global technology space, as Julie said. We're a Fortune Global 500 company and have been recognized as one of Fortune magazine's world's most admired companies. Lenovo's story has always been about shaping computing intelligence to create a better world. Lenovo is a part of the Valuable 500, which is a global business collective working towards increased representation and inclusion. Our employee resource groups, ERGs, are a crucial part of this mission. Our ERGs are empowered groups that connect employees through gender, race, nationality, sexual orientation, and shared experiences. Each one impacts the business and continues to innovate new ideas and strategies. In North America, we actually have 8 distinct ERGs with various missions. I'm coming to you from WIL, Women in Lenovo Leadership. WIL was launched in 2007 in North America on International Women's Day, actually, with the purpose of addressing key priorities that will support a woman's growth and advancement here at Lenovo. WIL is involved in and helps to build events, programs, and HR processes to enhance work-life balance, mentoring, networking, training, and external partnerships with other players engaged in initiatives for women. An excellent example is our amazing event today. Again, very happy to be here and can't wait to hear the discussion. Back to you, Julie.
Thanks so much, Rowan. Okay, so on the next slide, we'll talk about why host the book club. Excuse me. So prior to COVID, we would do a yearly Women in IT event where we would invite all the top IT customers that we had and spend some time together and learn from each other. But when COVID hit, we said, oof, how are we going to keep this going? Because it was such a great event and we learned so much and met so many wonderful women. So Cassandra and team came to me and said, hey, Julie, how do you want to do this? I said, well, okay. Like I told you at the beginning of the presentation, I was like, I'm going to be selfish. I love to read and a free book is awesome. So let's do something about reading. And then I said, okay, well, I wanted to be a journalist in a previous life. I could be like the Oprah of CDW. I'm okay with that. So let me try that. And no, jokes aside, I wanted to learn about different topics, things I know nothing about. And that's why I said it's important to be humble at the beginning of this presentation. Just be authentic, be honest with yourself and others, self-aware. Make it fun, have some fun. Listen, I don't know this. I was never taught this, whatever the topic is, but let's have some fun learning it. And if you can learn with me and the authors can teach us, and then we can then mentor others, I think we're just winning all around. So what have we done in previous book clubs? So on the next slide, you'll see that so this is the top, but these were in order what we've done. So we read That's BS by Risha Grant, which we talked about biases, what kind of biases exist, unconscious bias, conscious bias, validated bias. There's so many biases. So we learned what that was. Then we met with Sam Rezafar, who's talked to us about child marriage and that it's still legal in Canada, by the way. And then we met with Emma DeBury, where I love the title, of course, Don't Touch My Hair. So obviously that got my attention. And where we talked about Black hairstyle and how they're protective hairstyle, as well as aesthetic, but also very important to understand that there's biases when it comes to that in the workplace and others. So we learned about that. Then on the next slide, we met with Kim Tui, who's a Montrealer. So I'm in Montreal, for those of you that don't know. She was hilarious. And we understood her immigrant journey from Vietnam to Canada and how difficult that was and how Montreal embraced her and her family and was integrated here. Then for Truth and Reconciliation Day, we met Tanya Talaga, where we learned, and this was a subject that was super hard for me to learn about, and it's in our own backyard and we know nothing about. And I say we because I always consult my network, say, hey, what do you know about this? What do you know about this? And everybody's like, you know what, I don't know anything. And so we've got a lot of work to do as Canadians here. Then we met with, I forget, Samantha, I think was her name, I'm so sorry, for Real Queer America, where we met the transgender community and learned a lot about that as well, which is another topic. Like you can see, I'm picking topics I know nothing about, and those are absolutely different from me, so I'm really lucky to be able to do that. So today is another topic I knew very little about. Of course, saw some movies here and there, but really didn't know much about. So I'm super excited to welcome Marsha Lederman. She's the Western arts correspondent for the Globe and Mail. But before joining the Globe, she worked for CBC Radio, mostly in Toronto, where she held a variety of positions, including national arts reporter. She also worked in a commercial radio as a reporter, newscaster, and talk show host. Born in Toronto, she now lives in beautiful Vancouver. So today we've invited Marsha to tell us her parents' story of loss and survival. Marsha, over to you.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm going to have to disagree. I think you are absolutely qualified to do this because you love
Yay!
books, and that's the main thing, right? And being curious is the number one way to ask good questions. So I always say if you want to be a journalist or the Oprah of CDW, then you should be curious, which you clearly are. So yes, I'm in Vancouver where it's not that beautiful today. We call it January because it's freezing, and I almost got a sweater to wear to this event, but I felt like that would be almost embarrassing. I don't want to do I don't want to do Vancouver wrong. And thank you to everyone who's here, taking time out of your day to talk about books and to talk specifically about my book. I really appreciate it. Um, this is a little different from other talks I've given because I wanted to talk to you about how people who work in your industry, technology, helped to make this book possible, and how much you have given me. So thank you, tech people. And if we have extra time, I'm going to see if any of you can help me wire up my wireless printer or make it work, and also my monitor. I have been working from home for 2.5 years without a proper monitor. Somebody rescue me. Okay, so I was at an event the other night, just Tuesday night, with a group of female philanthropists, very well-educated, smart women, and one of them had a history degree specializing in Holocaust studies. And she asked me a question after my talk, which was different from this talk. How did I find all of this information? How on earth did I dig all of these details up? Because she was a student who studied the Holocaust and she had never seen not any of these stories, but many of them. So how did I find them? So I would have loved to have taken the credit for digging up all of these terrible details, some of which are in my book, but with some exceptions, the stories and many of those details she was talking about were available to me because of technology. Um, I mean, we all know the internet can be a terrible place full of misinformation, but it's mostly the opposite of that. It's a way to find information that otherwise, for me, would have been obscure, difficult, impossible to find, in fact. So in writing my book, and I've got it right here, Kiss the Red Stairs, The Holocaust Once Removed, what I was doing was trying to piece together my parents' Holocaust experiences because they have both passed away. They're long dead, and I didn't ask enough questions when they were alive. So I had to rely on research. I'm going to give you the very bare bones of their stories. My father, Jacob Lederman, was born and raised in Łódź, Poland. If you're Polish, you would pronounce it Łódź, but we always said Łódź. And after the Nazis occupied Poland on September 1st, 1939, he and his family were moved or decided to move, I'm not sure which, to a place called Pietrków-Trzebanowski, and there they were in the ghetto. He was a forced laborer. He was doing some kind of work. And one day, I'm really summarizing here, he was about to be executed. They were going to kill him. And he bribed a Nazi soldier. He escaped. He got false papers from a Polish official, and he used them to take the train and escape into Germany, which I've always found so ironic. And in Germany, he managed to get a job on a farm and live with this farming family for the rest of the war, pretending to be a Catholic Polish man named Tadek Rudnicki, which was the name on those false papers. Um, he escaped, but his family were all murdered. His father and mother and his big sister and little brother were murdered in gas chambers at Treblinka. My mother was born also in Poland, but in a city called Radom or Radom. And she was in the ghetto when she was 15 years old, walking on the street with a friend, and they were taken aside by a Nazi officer and told that they had to go to work. And they were put to work um, setting up barracks for the Nazis who were going to be like overseeing, I guess, the ghetto or part of the ghetto. Um, she not only was forced to set up the barracks, but to live in them with a number of other young women, teenagers, really. Um, but because of that, I mean, it sounds like the worst thing in the world, but because of that, she was not in the ghetto when it was liquidated. And most of the people who lived there were sent to the gas chambers at Treblinka as well, including her parents and her little brother. She was later deported to Auschwitz, and she was there for 3 months in 1944. And then, by some miracle, she was deported elsewhere to a satellite camp of Buchenwald in Lippstadt, Germany. And there she was a forced laborer making munitions for her enslavers. Um, she was sent on a death march along with about 700 other women at the end of March 1945, and on April 1st, 1945, she was liberated by the U.S. Army. It was Easter Sunday, and it was also Passover. So these were things that I did know, but I wanted to know more. I wanted to know the details of their experience. What was it like to be in the Radom ghetto? What was it like to be in that factory where my mother had to work? In fact, she worked in a few factories. Or in Pietrków-Trybunalski, where my father was. What were the conditions like? What was that death march like? How did they come to be liberated by these American soldiers? So, because I waited too long and did not ask my parents these questions directly, I used the internet. I had the internet, and I could talk literally for days about what I found, so I won't do that. Don't worry. I know you've got stuff to do. But I'll give you a few small examples. So there's a site I found called jewishgen.org. It's a Jewish genealogy site, and it has a wealth of witness testimonies from the Holocaust. So many stories, and often they intersect and overlap, which is really interesting. It's very interesting to see how different people witnessed the same event or perceived the same experience. So here's a testimony I found about the Radom ghetto, where my mother was imprisoned with her family, including her father, who was an Orthodox Jew who had a beard. And you'll understand why I'm telling you this. So this is what I read. Several SS men were known by their favorite pastime, cutting off beards of Orthodox Jews, mostly on one side of the face only, and making them pose for photographs in grotesque positions. There were many instances of setting the victim's beard on fire with matches while his hands were tied behind his back. Horrific, I know. So I read many stories on that website that were so helpful to give me an idea of what my parents would have seen and experienced or been afraid of at the time. There's another website run by the Polish Museum Polin, which tells the story of Jews in Poland, not just during the Holocaust, but for hundreds of years prior to that. And I was supposed to go to that museum. My flight to leave for Warsaw was March 12th, 2020. So I didn't get to go to Warsaw, but I did get to spend a lot of time on this website. There's an area called Virtual Shtetl, and a shtetl is a village, but it's a very particular kind of village, a small kind of ramshackle group of wooden homes and little businesses where Jews lived and worked. In Eastern Europe, particularly. I always say, like, picture Fiddler on the Roof. That's what we're talking about. That's a shtetl. I checked the other day, and on this museum's website, there were 79,854 articles on that site. So tons of information. I plugged in Radom Ghetto, where my mother was, and found some really important information. Not so there were some witness testimonies, but just like facts, like how many Jews lived in Radom before the war. It was a third of the population. Where the main synagogue was in relation to to the town, when it was built, when people were forced into the ghettos, and when the ghettos were liquidated, when my mother was saved living in those barracks. And having those dates from a reliable source, not just Wikipedia, was very important to me for obvious reasons. Um, Another really cool moment was when I found the database for the Holocaust Museum Yad Vashem, which is based in Jerusalem. From there, I was able to find out information about my grandparents, their birth dates, in some case their death dates, and it was from forms that my parents filled out when they visited that museum probably in 1976. So here I was more than 40 years later in Vancouver, able to pull up these forms and see their handwriting and get all of this information directly from them. That was an amazing moment. Um, the New York Times has an amazing digital archive, and I could read articles from the wartime and before the war that described concentration camps, because a big part of my story is why I became a journalist, because I felt like reporters could have saved the Jews from this terrible event if they'd reported on it. But as I learned from reading these articles online, people did know it was reported, and it happened anyway. Um, and I'll give one more example. I've got lots more, but I think Julie has lots of questions for me. But on YouTube, I was able to watch this film called Night at the Garden. It's a short film. It was nominated for an Oscar, which was how I found out about it. And it was about a Nazi rally that took place at Madison Square Garden in New York in February 1939. And I had read about that rally. I knew it had happened, but I'd never seen this chilling footage. It was packed with people that looked like us, like people who had good jobs and were, upstanding citizens, it looks like. And they were doing the Nazi salute, and they were laughing at a Jewish man who was assaulted on stage. It was horrific, but I was able to see this video, and then I was able to describe it in my book without having to rely on someone else's words, because I could see the actual footage. Anyway, I could go on, and I won't. But I did want to say that thanks to the work that you do, you have helped me find my own story so I could write this book. And as I was presented with more and more of this information, I knew that I had to write this book. So I want to thank you all, even if you don't come over and make my printer work, for helping me write my book.
We will send
So,
you someone, I promise.
okay.
For the low, low price of, no, I'm kidding. We will gladly send you somebody.
No, no, no,
Thank
I
you
am
so
joking.
much. No, no, I know. Thank you so much for that. I mean, wow, I think Cassandra and I got a lot of emails, texts. This book is so good. And I think I was saying to you prior to this, I never know if the books are going to be good. It's always a gamble. So I'm super excited. Like I read it in 3 days. It was so good. And so I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes and learning all this stuff about my parents. I think that your first talk or your first conversation was at age 5, correct? If I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. And so do you like I don't remember what I did yesterday. Like, do you remember how you felt, that feeling of, and you're 5 years old. So how does your mind process that?
Yeah, so I don't remember what I did yesterday either. I'll just tell you
Okay, good.
that.
I'm
But
not
I do
alone then.
remember this particular event. So I was 5. I was living in Toronto in a suburb in North York, and I had made my first friend, Pearl, who was 5 as well. And I was hanging out at her house a lot. And her house was a lot different from mine. My house felt kind of dead. And it's probably not the best word to use, but it did. It just felt it was really quiet. Pearl's house was like full of joy and warmth and excitement and like chaos, but like
Sure.
beautiful chaos. And she had grandparents, and I didn't. So I came home one day and I said to my mother, Pearl has grandparents. Why don't I? Simple question, right? Like the easiest sort of
Innocent.
thing,
Yeah.
but yeah, innocent. And my mother was clearly taken aback. She was blindsided. She
She
was
wasn't
not
ready.
expecting this
Hmm.
question. And she answered in a really frank, kind of horrific way. She said, not kind of horrific.
Yeah.
Um, she said, you don't have grandparents because they were murdered by the Germans. The Germans didn't like Jews, so they killed us. They killed Jews in gas showers. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact
Yeah, yeah,
wording,
yeah.
but that was
Yeah.
it. So I'm like, I'm five, right? First of all, Jews, like, isn't everyone Jewish? I guess when you're
Sure.
five, before you're out in the world, you think everyone has the same experience as you. So I just assumed everyone was Jewish. Um, who are Germans? What's a German? And do they still hate us? Like, do I have to be worried about these Germans? But I was mostly consumed with this idea of these gas showers. What did they look like? Did it look like the shower in our bathroom and gas came out of the spout instead of water? And if so, how exactly did that kill you? Did it burn you? Did it suffocate you? What was going on? But of course, I said nothing. I just was
Sure.
quiet. And I think that that encounter, and I really don't blame my mother. Like, it was a completely different time. There was no support. There were no social workers explaining to them how to parent or helping them get over their own trauma. She did her best, and she gave me this answer, and this answer sort of taught me to be careful about asking questions. And I do wonder if it led to me not asking the questions in her lifetime that I should have asked. I did ask some questions for sure, but not enough.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my introduction to it. Even though I sort of knew my parents had been through something, they talked about being in camp. There was a lot of talk about being hungry. The food, the importance of food in our house was like utmost. But this was my first window into what we now call the Holocaust.
Well, I don't blame you for not wanting to ask another question after that, because if that's the answer you got,
Yeah.
that's traumatizing in its own. Just that, and I feel that we don't give our parents a pass, right, when they do the best that they can. And your mom and dad have been through, my parents have never been through anything similar, like not even close to that. You know what I mean? And so I think your parents are heroes, by the way. I think that that's amazing, of what they've done and what they've been through, and who they raised clearly. They did a good job. But I wanted to
Thank you.
talk about something that I had never read about. So I'm super, like, I'm going to jump a couple of chapters here and just dive into intergenerational trauma. Because for me, I mean, obviously, I think I'm a smart enough woman to know what that means, but I never read about it, or I never, like, I heard the word, but I'm like, meh, okay, like, word of mouth, you heard that this happened, so it traumatized you, but you bring it to our attention where it's not just psychological, but physiological, like it's physical, it's physically transferred to the survivors' children or the next generation, and then so on. So could you just take us through a little bit, how you describe it in the book?
Sure. So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm terrible at science. You're thinking, okay, she's terrible at technology. She's terrible at science. Why are we listening to this woman? But I did do a lot of reading and a lot of research and a lot of interviews with people about this. So intergenerational trauma, I think, is a really hot topic. Hot is not a great word for it, but I think people are talking about
Buzzword.
it a lot right
Yeah.
now, especially when we hear about the residential schools, a travesty, and the impact on the descendants of people who were sent to those schools. So it's basically a trauma that is experienced by the offspring or descendants, I guess is better, of a person who experienced the trauma. So I don't, I think there was a long time, really in the 60s, a lot of studies started, in fact, in Montreal. Montreal was a center of this, that looked at the children of Holocaust survivors that were having some trouble. And I think that at the time, the belief was that this is an issue of nurture. So these children were
Hmm.
being raised by people who had been through horrible trauma, and as a result, maybe couldn't parent that well, and the children were affected. And absolutely believe that's true. Then around 2015, I started seeing, this was before I was writing this book, I started seeing stories about research in that looked at it on a physiological level, as you said. So some of the headlines were like descendants of Holocaust survivors have altered stress hormones, or parents' traumatic experiences may make it harder for offspring to bounce back from trauma, things like that. And at the time, I was dealing with some hard stuff in my personal life, and I felt like I was having a hard time. And I wondered, like, could this be me? Is it possible that it's not just that my parents were ill-equipped to be perfectly present, amazing parents? Was there something else that was happening? So the study of this is epigenetics, and I'm going to try to explain it. Again, I'm going to be very general, and if there are scientists in the audience, I apologize for my rudimentary understanding of this. But basically, as humans, we can adjust to our environment, right? So let's say there isn't a lot of food to eat, our bodies will adapt to that somehow. So with trauma, the thinking is that there's um, a chemical marker that is left on the genes of the person who experiences it. So their DNA is not altered. The gene is not altered, but the way it it's expressed is altered. So some genes might be silenced or expressed in great abundance, like cortisol, the stress hormone. And the thinking with epigenetics is that this chemical mark can be passed down to the person's offspring. So there was a study that came out in 2015 that got a lot of attention, and there are a lot of studies, or there are quite a few studies happening now, and a lot of interest in it. I wouldn't say it's proven science. There are a lot of skeptics,
Sure.
but it's super interesting. And you know, for me, like, spoiler alert, in the book, I conclude that it doesn't matter if I've been affected by nature or nurture. It doesn't matter. For sure, what happened to my parents has had an impact on me. There's no question.
Of course.
What happens to your parents, of course, has had an impact on you. It just so happens that my parents lived through this horrific thing. So again, I'm sorry that that's sort of a
No, I
rudimentary
think that was
explanation.
perfect.
Okay, good.
That was
Thank you.
perfect. And no, 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 it's perfect. And I think that that's why it's important as us as leaders in companies and or individual contributors and or anyone. I always try to give a little bit of a corporate view on what we learn. And you know, when you're interviewing, when you're discussing, like, this is important. Like, this is where the biases are created unconsciously. You know, this is where you learn more. Like, I can't even imagine, we talked about the Holocaust survivors, you talked about the residential schools, but let's talk about racism in general. You know, that people still live that trauma today. We have slavery, which lasted 400 years. You know, I mean, how do you, you know, and that, I loved your quote, the get over it crowd. Like, I can't understand that crowd at all. And so how are you supposed to get over something like that? So I just, it was so important for me to say this out loud in this forum, that this is, like you said, nature or nurture. They're both super important to consider when speaking to your colleagues. Like, and we're not just talking about racism. We could be talking about abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, any kind of trauma that anybody lives, right? So
Exactly. And I just want to say
yeah,
that
of course.
even though those studies that I cited, that I was studying specifically in 2015, 2016, dealt with Holocaust survivors, there are studies now with residential school survivors, descendants of residential school survivors, slavery. There's a really interesting study about descendants of the Civil War, people who had experienced the U.S. Civil War, I should say, people
Mhm.
who experienced that sort of trauma. Another researcher I talked to is studying the effects of the Holodomor. I'm sorry, I've mispronounced that, but the intentional famine of Ukrainian
Mm,
people
mhm.
under the Soviets, that was horrific and led to millions of deaths. So this is this is a universal issue. And you talk about the get over it crowd. Yeah, people have said, I hear people say, oh, get over it already. It's not happening now. Well, it is happening right now in my
Of
body,
course.
actually.
And it keeps happening. On page 194, you say that a German accent can set you on edge. So in my opinion, rightfully so, that's, in my opinion, again, what is called a validated bias. You know what I mean? Like, it's what you know. Like, how do you deal with that though? Like, I mean, you realize that this is a trigger. So how do you deal with everyday triggers when you have that trauma in you?
Yeah, I have a lot of triggers. That is one I am deeply ashamed of because I know that someone speaking today with a German accent was in no way responsible for
Of
anything that
course,
happened
of
to my
course.
family. But it's there. It's there. It's a flash. It is like visceral. And how do I deal with it? Well, I'm working really hard on um, being present and telling myself this. It like I say, it happens in a flash and I get
No,
over
no,
it
of
very
course.
quickly. But I really think, one thing I want to do is um, I want to spend more time with descendants of Nazis. I think it would be
Sure.
really interesting to talk to them, and I have talked with some for other books that I've written about or read or moderated events with. I feel like we have a lot that we can say to each other and help each other with. And that trip that got canceled in 2020 was also supposed to be a
Hmm.
trip to Germany, and I really want to go back there. I need to spend some time in Germany. I have been there for a few days when I was a teenager, not a teenager, in my early 20s backpacking. It was a different experience. I want to go back there as descendant of Holocaust survivors and really explore what I need to explore. And I think that will help me. Germany is amazing in how it has dealt with this terrible history. The education, the memorialization, the monuments, the restitution, really has to be commended. Other countries have not done as good a job. For instance, Poland, where my parents were from.
Well, and even in our own backyard with the things that Canada has gone through or has done, we're not very good at acknowledging it either, here for exactly the indigenous
Okay.
population and the slaves that were here. Like we need to, if you don't talk about it, if you don't learn about it, you're not going to do better, right?
100%, but I really feel like we're getting better. I feel like there's so much work to be done, but even in the last year or two, the last year, things have really improved on that front in terms of awareness. Um, and thank goodness. And like here in BC, it's part of the curriculum now, residential schools. So my kid is learning about it at school. I went through my entire education, my entire academic career, never learning word one about it. That is
Yeah.
appalling, and thank goodness that's changing.
Well, and let's hope it follows all the provinces because I know my province needs a lot of work in that department. And I'll be the first to say I've never learned about anything other than French Catholic, nothing. And that's too bad. And I try to do better with my kids and my surrounding. But and hence why we're doing the book club so I could learn
Yes,
stuff.
it's good.
Okay, so now um, you understand your parents' story, you're getting older, and then you meet someone, and then you marry a non-Jewish person, correct? Did I read that
Yeah,
properly?
yeah.
So that's super interesting to me, where obviously you've got your trauma, if I can call it that. I don't know how else to call it. And then he's coming in, and so how was that? How was that having two different backgrounds or two different religions? How was that coming together? I'm not saying the right words. I told you I was going to
Yeah,
stumble.
yeah.
I'm stumbling because I don't know how to say this, but how do you have somebody that's not gone through anything like this and then try to build a life together?
Well, another spoiler alert, we're divorced now,
Yes, I know.
which is part of the
But
book, but
it was good in the beginning, so I'm just curious in the beginning and then what led you to the divorce? Yeah.
it's funny, didn't even really consider that he wasn't Jewish. It wasn't an issue for me. It would probably have been an issue for my parents, but they were dead by then,
Mm.
so it was not a
Oh yeah, you
problem.
think they would have had an issue with it? Yeah.
Probably.
Okay. That's
Well,
interesting.
maybe not. Actually, I'll take that back because my partner before him, who I lived with, was not Jewish, and my mother was. very happy with him too.
Okay.
So I don't know, but it didn't really figure. But I have been thinking about this a lot. I've been talking to other people who have similar trauma because this book is coming out and people want to talk to me about it.
Sure.
And it's like there's a shorthand. We understand each other. We get each other's quirks and neuroses and weird stuff that someone else could never really understand in the same way. Um, Not to say that I should be with someone necessarily who has that, you know, knowledge in their body, because I'm not sure two of us together would be that great. But um, yeah, that's a really interesting question that you asked, because it never really occurred to me. And we did, we raise we are raising our son, co-parenting our son as a Jewish
Okay.
child.
There you
And
go.
in something, not that this really matters, but in Judaism, it's matrilineal. So
Oh,
if the mother is Jewish, the child is considered Jewish, even if the father isn't. But if the father is Jewish and the mother isn't, traditionalists would not consider that child to be Jewish. There's your
oh,
little
okay.
bit of there's your fun fact for the day.
Well, I've got a lot to learn about the Jewish religion because I have to admit I know nothing about it. I just know what I've, been privy to, right? And so how is your son? So today your son would be how old today?
He's 13.
13. And
Yeah.
so do you feel that the generational trauma has affected him as well now because he's like the next generation? How's that looking? Like he's 13, he's full of hormones right now and probably giving you one word answers, I would assume. At least mine are almost there. And so how has it manifested itself in him, or we're good so
Yeah.
far?
Yeah, he currently despises me. That is true.
Okay.
That we're at that point. So a lot of the book deals with my great fear that he is going to inherit the
Hmm.
trauma that I believe has plagued me. Um, and how can I deal with this? How can I stop it? How can I prevent it, fix him, ensure that he does not go through um, some of the difficulties that I've gone through? So there are a few things. One is like he has to be presented with these stories in a way that is different from how I was presented with them. When he was 5 years old, I didn't tell him about gas showers.
Right.
When he was 7, I tell the story about being at Hebrew school when I was 7 years old, which was school I took like after school, um, being shown these horrific documentary,
I
this
remember reading
horrific
that.
documentary film, which was probably Night and Fog, I now realize, but it was like a bulldozer pushing bodies into a pit. I was 7, and I remember looking at that and thinking one of
7.
those bodies could have been my grandmother. So
Hmm.
I have to teach him the story in a different way. For the longest time, I didn't want to tell him anything about it. I wanted to protect him from it. But that also is not the right thing to do. He has to learn about it. He's going to learn about it one way or the other. I just didn't want him to ever feel like, oh my God, are they going to come after me the way I did when I was a kid? Um, so I've found sort of some positive stories to tell him. You said that my parents were heroes, and I've really tried to emphasize that with him. And it's something
Hmm.
I became very aware of as I was writing this book. I've always thought of my parents as victims, but in fact, they were heroes. And if I've inherited um, their trauma, I've also, I believe, inherited their resilience, because they survived this terrible thing, and it wasn't just because of what they did. Obviously, it was luck and circumstance. It was amazing, like a true miracle. Um, but then they started lives again. They got married. They had kids. They moved to a country where they didn't speak the language. They built a home. They built a business, and they just had normal lives, which to me is an incredible act of resilience. So I believe that if they were resilient, maybe I inherited that too, and I hope my son is inheriting that as well.
Well, and that's the part we forget to talk about too. we tend to talk about the bad parts, but there's lots of good parts that I'm sure, like you said, resilience. In the book, though, which is something surprising to me, especially after getting to know you a little bit better today, you talk about having the imposter syndrome. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
that was super surprising to me. And where do you think that comes from? And how do you handle it today?
Wow. Okay. So this is a mostly women's book club, right?
Yes, it's like a lot of women have the imposter syndrome, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
Totally. I mean, this is really an issue with so many women I know. And I know all of these accomplished women, journalists, artists, writers, and I feel like so many of them, especially like my age, the younger ones don't have it as much, which is amazing to me. Um, feel like they have this imposter syndrome. Like, why am I here? They're going to find out that I know nothing and I'm actually really stupid. Um, but for me, I think there's an added level of baggage there because, my parents were immigrants. They came to this country. They did not speak the language, either language. They had to start from scratch. They they always felt like they were looked down upon by others. I don't know if that's true, but that was how they perceived it, because their accents gave them away. And they were these, there was a term that we use called greeners, like they were
Okay.
green to this country.
Mm,
And they use that term in a self-deprecating way. We're greeners. What do we know? And so, you know, they had imposter syndrome, although they didn't feel like they were imposters. They were just, working at
sure.
whatever jobs they had and making a life. But I look around me, and a lot of the people that are my peers are the children of lawyers and doctors and professors, and their parents have multiple degrees. And, my parents weren't able to even finish high school. I don't even think my mother was able to start high school because of the Nazis didn't let Jews
Sure.
go to school. So I guess it's like a double whammy. I'm a woman and I have imposter syndrome. I'm a child of immigrants who were not very academically accomplished, so I have imposter syndrome. A lot of the not a lot, but some survivors came to Canada and the US and did extremely well financially. That was not the case with my parents, and I think that also made them feel like they were less than. Not only were they immigrants who spoke with an accent and didn't know how to spell words correctly all the time, but they didn't even have like this armor of wealth that they had achieved that so many of their friends had. And it just makes me so sad to think about
Of
that
course.
because they were amazing, and I probably never told them that.
I'm sure they knew. I'm sure they knew you felt that way. But I would
Mm,
imagine that they would compare themselves to the others around them, right? Like, oh, look at, and that's probably where that
yeah,
came from.
yeah.
But how special was your trip with your mom, um, when you, I think you went back to Poland or Germany?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't,
Yeah.
Poland, right?
Poland.
Yeah.
In 1998, my mother, my two sisters, my first cousin, and one of my nieces went on something called the March of the Living, which
Mhm.
is Jews come from all over the world to Poland, and on Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Memorial Day, they march it's about 3 kilometers from the main Auschwitz camp to Birkenau, which was part of Auschwitz, but a few kilometers away. And I was really worried about taking this trip. I was worried about how traumatizing, triggering it was going to be for my mom to be back in Auschwitz where she had been a
Yeah.
prisoner. And for me, frankly, to see that. And we went to other concentration camps as well, a place called Majdanek, a place that looks like you could flip a switch and it could be up and running again. It's preserved so well. And Treblinka, where all of my grandparents were murdered, which is just a vast memorial now. And it was interesting because that day, that march was incredibly empowering because it was thousands of Jewish people, mostly young Jewish people, high school and university students. We were in an older group. Um, we all wore the same color. We were all issued a jacket, a blue jacket. So it was this sea of blue marching there as if to say, we are still here. You failed. We
Mm.
survived. It was amazing. And then on that same trip, we were able, my family members and I on our own were able to go to my father's city, Lodz, and my mother's city, Radom, to try to find what we could, what was left. And in Radom, we found my mother's apartment. It was there. The occupant was home. He let us in, and my mother was, I'd never seen her like that. The joy on her face, remembering where she was a child with parents and a sister and two brothers and happy before hell took over. And that was a really important lesson to me that when I think about my parents' histories, I often think only about the Holocaust and the terrible
Mhm.
things that happened to them. I was forgetting that they were children and in my father's case a teenager too before this happened, and that part of their lives has sort of gotten lost in the mix. And that visit really reminded me that it was important to learn about my mother, um, before those things happened.
And you were able to see the red stairs, which is what the book is titled for, correct? For your dad, where your dad is that? Am I
Actually,
getting that wrong?
yeah,
Oh,
actually,
sorry.
no. So I don't want to talk too much about this just because if
Sure,
people are going to read the book, I feel
sure.
like it's an interesting reveal.
Okay, sure.
But no, that remains something I need to do still. And that's
Okay,
something
so then I misread something, but there's something about
there, yes, there
something.
are red stairs in Poland,
Yes.
but I haven't seen them.
Yes, no,
Um,
but I
I
thought you
want
had
to.
seen them, or
I
maybe it's because you wanted to, so I
my
forget.
my sister saw them. My
Okay,
sister,
thank you.
yeah.
I knew somebody saw
Yeah.
them, so
And
that's
then,
kind of cool too,
and I was on my way to see
to
them
go see
in
them.
March of
Yeah.
2020, and it didn't happen
It
because
makes
of
me sad
COVID.
that we don't, yeah, and it makes me sad that like the March of the Living, I'm sorry, is that what the
Yeah.
title of the
Hmm.
day is? I never knew that existed. I've never seen a picture, a video, an announcement, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I've never seen that, and I think that that's the type of images that we should be seeing today,
I'm
to remember
sure
and to appreciate.
it happens every year. I mean, it hasn't lately, but
Sure.
I don't know if it happened this year or not, but it takes place in April, which is when the Holocaust Remembrance Day is. And it's kids from all over the world, or like young adults and from all over the world, including lots from Montreal. I know that
I would imagine
Montrealers
there's a
go.
big population. Yeah, and but I'm wondering though, is there any celebrations locally too though?
Like in
Like in
Canada?
Canada, like in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, like is there celebrations locally?
Yeah, not, I wouldn't say celebration, definitely commemorations. There are
Thank you, sorry. Yeah.
Yom HaShoah events, for sure in Montreal. I took part in one in
Okay.
Vancouver this year. It was really beautiful. A survivor spoke. There was beautiful music, with a small a quartet, and they had a few survivors there lighting candles. So yes, and it's it would be amazing to have non-Jews come. So I
Sure.
hope that if, I'm going to find out
The
where there are some
Montreal one is.
commemorations next year in Montreal, and I'm
Yeah,
going to send it to you because
I would love that.
it's very touching and beautiful, and highly recommended.
Yes, well, as there's big populations of everyone, but I know there's a big population of Jewish in Montreal. My kids were born at the Jewish hospital. It's the best hospital in town.
The
So, I
Jewish
mean,
general, yes.
yes, it's really well, and I love the community. You talk about community in the book, right? How important community was for you being in Vancouver and not knowing anybody and not having any family. And so I can relate to that very much. My family has become my neighbors in my community as well here. And I know I have one on the line today that's listening in. And if it wasn't for her, I don't know where I'd be because I'm alone with the kids. So I get that. But the community within Montreal is also, they reinvest, in the Jewish hospital, for instance, or the schools or the synagogue. I think that's wonderful, and I think that we should learn a lot from that. And so the community that helped you after your divorce in Vancouver, I would assume, is still part of your everyday life today.
Oh my gosh, they are my family. And yeah, they're mostly women, not all women, but an amazing group, and we lift each other up. You know, there are ups and downs in all of our lives, but we're always there for each other. And I know that if I needed something, they would be there for me, and I would always be there for them. And community is so important. Whatever, it's often something that we construct. This is what I've learned ourselves, and I think that it's key to having joy in life and feeling safe and secure. And it's something that a lot of us have really been missing, obviously, over the last 2 years. It's been very difficult not to be able to see those people, but, thank goodness for technology again. So during the pandemic, my sisters and I started regular video calls, the three of us, which we'd never done before. And I've been doing it with other girlfriends and friends. And technology has really helped. I mean,
Sure.
I swear to God, we didn't plan to wrap up this way, but it really has helped continue that sense of community, which I think is absolutely essential for survival.
Well, and this is what the women's networks are at our organizations, is to make sure that the women have a safe space to go to and to discuss these type of topics, which we never discuss in a corporate setting, right? This is not, we don't talk about the Holocaust or intergenerational trauma and or how that affects you every day at work, at home. Like there's so many topics. And so that's why we shed a light on this through this event. And so there is a question in the chat. Catherine wanted to, because I know we have 3 minutes left. I'm conscious of the time. She wanted to make sure that she put a link in the chat asking about the museum that you were referring to. And hold on, let me just make sure I'm saying
So
this
I'm not sure
properly.
if there's Yad Vashem. I'm going to I'll name three
Sure.
museums that are really important. Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, and the other museum I mentioned was Polin, Polin, in Warsaw, which tells the history of the Jewish people. And most cities have a Holocaust Center as well. They're building one in Montreal, I understand.
Really? I didn't
There's
even know that.
there's one in Toronto that's just being moved into a bigger space, and there's one here in Vancouver as well. And of course, if you're in Winnipeg, the Human Rights Museum, Canadian Museum for Human Rights, has a Holocaust section as well.
So I'm going to ask my last question, and it's kind of a weird one, so you'll excuse me.
Okay.
But I wonder how, this is a question I sent you ahead of time. Don't worry, I'm not putting you on the spot. I wonder, how do you feel about books like The Tattoo Artist of Auschwitz and The Librarian of Auschwitz? Like because first of all, I'll be honest, I love that book. I thought it was great. And then I read Silka's Journey, which was the follow-up to that book. But how do you, as a I think you said offspring earlier. I'm trying to, a child of survivor. How do you feel about those books? Like, is that a good thing, or is that not giving it justice, or at least it's shedding light? Like, how do you feel about that?
So, The Tattooist of Auschwitz has been a very controversial book. It's
Yeah, that's what I'm
hugely
asking.
successful. Many people have pointed to errors of accuracy in the book. It's a novel, but it's
Hmm.
based on a true story. It wasn't my favorite book, I'll be honest, not because of the controversy, but I will say if it gets people reading about this event and interested in
Talking
this
about it.
event, if it taught you something about the Holocaust, so what if all the facts, like it's not pretending to be a textbook, it's
No,
historical fiction. So I'm all for it. I don't have
as
a
long as
problem with it.
no, and I'm bringing it up because there's so many books written about so many topics. I always wonder how another author feels about novels when it comes to this important topic. So listen, we're at 2 o'clock on the dot. I told you we wouldn't have enough time. I didn't finish all the questions. I took it where it went, and I think I learned even more today than I did while reading. I learned so much, And so please send me, and I will send to the team here for the commemoration events. I would like to absolutely take my family and go locally. And
Thank you.
can't thank you enough. I know all the ladies that have read the book love the book, and I'm sure we'll cross paths at a later time.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for your attention today.
Thank you so much. So we're going to conclude, ladies. So Cassandra will turn off the WebEx event, and we'll see you at the next one. I think it's in August. I don't have a title or topic yet, so I'm glad for you guys to send me some emails with suggestions. Thank you, ladies. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, Marsha.
Bye.
Bye-bye.